CEO Millionaire abandons black twins. Years later, he panics seeing them in his own company. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. New York, December 1998. Snow is falling thick and fast. In the maternity waiting room at St. Luke's Hospital, James Whitmore paced across the cold tile floor, his steps quick and uneven. In one hand was a thermos of coffee, long since gone cold. In his head, 100 anxious thoughts spun, none of them making any sense. The doors to the surgical wing suddenly swung open. A nurse rushed out, gloved hands raised, her expression serious. "Mr. Whitmore, your wife is being taken in for an emergency C-section. Twins, 32 weeks. James froze. "Please, can I go in with her?" "I'm sorry, sir, you can't. She's in good hands. We're doing everything we can." Elena was already being wheeled away. James caught only a glimpse of her face, pale and drawn, but she managed to mouth something. "Stay. Let them see you." James was guided back to the waiting area, a sterile, silent room that smelled sharply of antiseptic and fear. 30 minutes passed. Then the doors opened again. This time, a different nurse appeared, her face calm, with a soft smile. "Mr. Whitmore, congratulations. Your wife has delivered a healthy baby boy and girl. Everyone is safe. Would you like to see your children?" His legs moved before he even registered it. He followed the nurse like a sleepwalker, his mind racing with thoughts of baby names they'd picked out, the new house they'd talked about buying, the future that now seemed so close. And then he saw them. Through the incubator glass, two tiny newborns lay sleeping, swaddled tightly, their chests rising and falling in gentle rhythm. Their skin was a deep, warm brown. James stared at them, frozen. Their hair, their nose bridges, their faces, none of it looked like him. "These are Daniel and Chloe," the nurse said gently. "They're strong, even for being premature." James's throat tightened. He placed a hand on the glass, but couldn't move closer. There was only one question in his mind, looping endlessly. How could this be? He believed Elena loved him. They'd pushed past so many obstacles. Families who disapproved, cultural differences, years of struggle. She'd once mentioned her Moroccan grandmother, a family story told in passing. But James had never doubted her. Never thought to. Now, two tiny infants were the living truth. And he knew they couldn't be his. He backed away, heat flushing through him. "I'm sorry. I just need some air." He turned and left, stumbling down the hallway. Voices echoed from overhead speakers, the scent of disinfectant thick in his nose. James walked faster, pushing through the hospital doors into the freezing lot outside. He climbed into his BMW, tried to start it. His hands shook too hard to fit the key into the ignition. A man who had mapped out every step of his career, who had conquered boardrooms and market predictions, now couldn't even figure out how to respond to two newborns looking back at him. He drove away. He left Elena behind. He left the two infants he couldn't claim. He left behind everything he once called family. And that night, the snow fell heavier than it had all winter. Boston, fall 2023. Outside, the city was buzzing with the shift of seasons, leaves turning crisp amber and gold. But on the 47th floor of the Whitmore Tower, winter had settled in long ago. James Whitmore stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, staring down at the city he'd called his life's work for the past 25 years. One hand toyed absently with the gold ring he never felt truly fit him. The other rested against the cold glass. This was James when no one was looking, stoic, sharp-edged, accomplished. But beneath the surface, he was tired. Not the kind of tired sleep could fix, but the kind that comes from pretending too long. Pretending that success meant fulfillment. Pretending that he'd left the past behind. Carolyn, his wife, had been his companion through tax strategies, gala appearances, and the political circles James longed to join. They were the perfect couple on magazine covers, Whitmore Capital's golden pair. But behind closed doors, they didn't share morning coffee or whispered late-night thoughts. They had no children. 2 miscarriages had carved a quiet canyon between them. After that came silence. There were nights James would jolt awake, imagining himself standing in a conference room under interrogation lights. "Why did you leave?" A woman's voice would echo from nowhere, and he never had an answer. He buried it under work. Whitmore Capital became one of New England's most trusted private equity firms. James built his empire from intellect and iron, but in his chest, the ashes never cooled. That morning, seated in the conference room, the crisis wasn't about numbers. It was about presence. Dawson Group, their cornerstone strategic partner, had abruptly pulled out. No reason given. "We've got one potential backer left," Dennis, his CFO, said flatly. "Ramirez Ventures." The twin siblings from New York. Smart, sharp, and hard to read. James looked down at the dossier. Chloe and Daniel Ramirez. His eyes lingered on the names longer than he expected. But it had to be exhaustion. His mind strained by the pressure. "Bring them in," James said. This week. He didn't know then. This meeting wouldn't just be about evaluating an investment. It would be the beginning of a reckoning with the past, and the first step toward a lifetime's worth of redemption. The 47th floor conference room had been meticulously prepared. Warm amber lighting, chilled water and beverages laid out, and floor-to-ceiling glass polished to a sheen, reflecting Boston's gloomy autumn skyline. James sat alone at the head of the table, slowly twisting his gold wedding band around his finger. He wasn't sure what he was feeling. Nervous? The business world was second nature to him by now. But today, his heartbeat was unsteady, like the first time he ever pitched to an investor. Chloe and Daniel Ramirez. Dennis was the one to escort them in. Two young professionals, early 30s tall and lean, silhouettes catching the soft light in a way that felt synchronized, uncanny. Chloe walked in first. Her dark curls were pulled into a sharp, high bun. Her slate gray suit was tailored with surgical precision. Daniel followed in a looser, slightly weathered blazer, effortless but grounded. Both dressed simply, but with an undeniable presence. Or more accurately, an unforgettable gaze. Hazel eyes, specifically amber like summer honey. James had seen those eyes before, in the mirror, in Elena's laugh, in the newborns he had walked away from. Daniel reached out to shake his hand first, but James paused, not to pull away, but to look. On Daniel's right wrist, just below the sleeve, was a small, teardrop-shaped mole, identical to his own. Chloe followed next. James noticed the soft curve of her lower lip, the subtle way she tilted her head when she spoke. Familiar, achingly familiar. "Thank you for your time," Daniel said first. "Or should we call you Dad?" The room froze. Dennis stiffened. James sank into his chair, the gold ring slipping from his hand. Daniel and Chloe sat down across from him, their faces blank, their timing surgical. "We've waited a long time to meet you," Chloe said evenly. "And we're not just here for a business deal." James tried to speak, but nothing came. His mouth was dry. "Why now?" he asked, voice gravelly. "Because we're old enough," Daniel replied. "Because Mom has cancer. And because it's time to stop waiting." Chloe placed a folder on the table. "We want to expand our investment operations into Boston, and Whitmore Capital needs help right now." James glanced through it. The proposal was airtight. The data, flawless. And notably, they weren't asking for outrageous terms. It was a good deal. "But in return," Chloe added, her voice lowering, "we want the truth. The reason why you left." That day, Daniel's voice was steady, but heavy. A bead of sweat traced down James's temple, stripping away whatever mask he had left. For the first time in 25 years, he was being forced to look directly at his past. The conference room door closed behind them with a soft, final click. And inside, 3 lives were about to change, irrevocably. James sat alone in the empty boardroom. Dennis had left a while ago, though he couldn't say exactly when. What remained was silence, and the presence of 2 people who had once been newborns behind hospital glass. It was just James and his twins. "We waited a long time," Chloe said, her voice steady. "But we didn't come to blame you. We just want to know." James took a deep breath. He had asked himself that question thousands of times, and always avoided the answer. But now, fate demanded he speak. "I panicked." The words were simple, but they cracked through decades of armor. James looked at the two faces in front of him, grown adults, carrying traces of his own. I waited for your birth like a pinnacle moment. Then your mother was rushed into surgery. I stood outside, holding a cold cup of coffee. And when the nurse brought me into the NICU, he choked up. I saw two babies, dark-skinned, lying in incubators. And I couldn't process it. Daniel leaned back, voice cool but sharp. Because our skin wasn't what you expected? James didn't defend himself. I didn't understand genetics. I didn't understand myself. Elena once mentioned her grandmother was North African. I didn't listen. Or maybe I didn't want to. Chloe's jaw tightened. And Mom? What did she say about you? Never a harsh word, James said firmly. I left, and she raised you both on her own. I know it must have been incredibly hard. But she never came after me. No lawsuit. No letter. Daniel's eyes narrowed. And you took that silence as forgiveness? James was quiet. Because that's exactly what he had told himself. It was the only way he knew how to survive. I convinced myself he'd be better off without me. That Elena would find someone more deserving. Chloe's eyes shimmered with a tear. She never remarried. Mom worked double shifts. Went back to school. She became a neonatal nurse. At the same hospital where she gave birth to us, Daniel added. And every time a premature baby came in, she'd look at them like she'd never abandoned anything. Chloe finished softly. James couldn't keep his face from crumpling. He was listening to a story about Elena, the woman he left in a sterile room with two newborns, who had turned that abandonment into purpose, who had transformed pain into profession. And he, the one who caused it all, had known nothing. I can't apologize for 25 years, James said finally, voice low but honest. That's yours to judge. But I will meet her. Anytime. I'm ready to say what I've avoided for most of my life. Daniel nodded. Chloe did too. There'll be a dinner, she said. And Mom, surprisingly, is ready. Ready to meet the man who once shattered her world. James nodded too. He felt like he had just stepped into a mirror, and for the first time, seen who he really was beneath all the pretending. And he was ready to face it. For the first time in decades, James Whitmore wasn't running anymore. Boston in late autumn held a quiet sadness. Golden leaves blanketed the sidewalks. Trees by the river swayed gently in the wind. James Whitmore sat alone in a private dining room at La Vigna, bathed in soft amber light, staring out the window at the shimmer of the river below. His navy suit had been chosen carefully, formal, but not too formal. Respectful, not overbearing. On the table, a bottle of wine remained unopened. His hands rested on the silver cutlery. Try not to fidget, try not to shake. The door opened. Daniel entered first, followed by Chloe. James stood. Then came Elena. 25 years may as well have been a lifetime. But in an instant he knew. It was her. Her hair was shorter now, touched with gray. Her eyes the same rich brown, but deeper, weathered with the kind of quiet resilience only heartbreak and time can create. James took a step forward, but Elena only nodded. Let's sit, James, she said calmly. We're here for dinner. Let's be adults, right? Her voice was steady. Not cold, not warm. The tone of someone who'd learned to store pain in a locked drawer and had only just opened it for the first time. Daniel helped her into her seat. Chloe settled beside her. James hesitated, then sat opposite. The space across the table felt like a canyon carved over a quarter century. Menus arrived. The wine was poured. Conversation began, cautiously. Elena asked about the firm, like a polite colleague, not a woman with shared history. Chloe presented partnership proposals with grace, not pressure. Daniel, careful and measured, filled in strategic gaps. James tried to keep his words balanced, but his hands occasionally trembled when he reached for his glass. The main course arrived. Elena had ordered baked scallops, the dish she'd once made for his birthday. You remember? She asked, unexpectedly. How could I forget? He answered quietly. I thought you had. So easily. I tried, he admitted. But that was just a lie I told myself. Elena didn't respond right away. Her hand rested on her lap. James noticed the calluses on her fingers, not from injury, but from years of living. You wonder why I never called? Why I didn't sue? Why I didn't demand anything? James remained silent. I asked myself that too, she said. Many nights. Then I remembered what my mother taught me. Holding on to anger only burns you from the inside out. He looked at her carefully. But did you ever forgive me? Elena met his eyes. James, I didn't forgive you. I moved forward. I chose to raise our children with love, not with bitterness. Chloe gently leaned toward her mother, picking up where she left off. I always knew she loved you, even if you weren't there. James's hands shook again. Daniel poured a small glass of wine for his father for the first time. A quiet gesture, as if to say, we're trying to learn each other now. The evening didn't end in tears, but under the soft glow of Beacon Street's lamps. James walked them to their car. As Elena reached the door, she turned and placed her hand gently on his shoulder. I came because Daniel and Chloe wanted to know their father, she said. And you? He asked, voice almost a whisper. Why did you come? I already know who you are, she replied. James swallowed. What do you know? That you left, she said, and that I survived. He nodded, a small motion heavy with truth. I survived, she continued, but that doesn't mean you weren't wrong, or that it's too late to make things right. She offered a faint smile. Start by being present in their lives. They still have time. And in the haze of falling leaves and streetlight glow, James knew. That dinner wasn't closure. It was a beginning. When pain has a name. 2 days after that dinner, James sat alone in his office as the winter sunrise spilled across the window pane. The soft light of morning poured into the room, but it couldn't chase away the cold that sat quietly in his chest. The morning meeting had been postponed. James pulled out his phone, scrolled through the calendar, and sent a short message to his assistant. Cancel everything. Family. Help you. I needed to make this right. This isn't about balancing a ledger, James, she said softly. It's about love. What connects us? And the fact that you're here, sitting with us in this silence, that already means something. That evening, James sat with his phone in hand. A text from Carolyn popped up. Still at the office? He replied, I'm at the hospital. Elena's sick. 3 minutes later. Good luck. With your former family. James closed his eyes. Pain always had a price. And sometimes it was pain itself that reminded us we were still capable of love. The next morning, James stood beside Chloe outside the ultrasound room. I'll look for another specialist, he told her. Another protocol. Something. I didn't fight for her then, but you're here now, Chloe interrupted gently. That matters more. James turned to face a mirror on the wall. There was fatigue on his face, deep lines of age and regret. But for the first time, he saw himself clearly. This was James, not the mogul, not the man who disappeared, but the man who stayed. Tired but honest, hurt but capable of love. He would keep fighting, even if it meant clinical trials, even if it meant risk. He couldn't rewind time, but he could protect the one thing left that truly mattered. Hope, the quiet forgiveness of someone who was once broken. The blow that struck James Whitmore the hardest wasn't being told he couldn't donate a kidney. It was the moment Elena looked him in the eye and said, I forgive you, James. Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry this pain for the rest of my life. He sat there in the hospital room, across from the woman he'd once abandoned and the 2 grown children he'd once walked away from. Inside him was a tangle of fear, remorse, and something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Daniel stood near the window, not looking back. We talked with Mom, he said. Even if you can't help medically, we've decided to invest in Whitmore Capital. Chloe sat across from him, so much like Elena it hurt. For many reasons. Maybe for the people still working there. Maybe for our family name. Maybe because it's simply the right thing to do. But mostly because Mom said, we face the past not to punish it, but to understand who we are now. James felt like he had been handed a new reason to exist. A few days later, at the Whitmore Capital boardroom, the chairman raised his voice. I understand the sentimentality of 2 long-lost kids trying to write some fairy tale ending. Chloe stood, calm and sharp. We are investors. No one funds a business out of emotion. We see value here. We see potential. We see strategy. Daniel added, you may see our connection to him. He nodded toward James, as a weakness. But for us, it's just context. What matters is now. And right now, we are business people. James watched his children speak. No lead. And for the first time, felt like he was witnessing the story he once refused to live. A story he now wanted to earn his place in. When the meeting ended, he quietly sat down next to Elena. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Why not hate me more? Why forgive me at all?" Elena turned to him, her dark eyes calm and deep. "Because you came back. Because the kids made their choice. And because I grew through that pain. Every time I watched Daniel or Chloe sleep, I made a decision. I wasn't going to raise them on resentment. I had to choose bitterness or freedom. I chose freedom." That night, James walked alone through the soft snow in Boston. His footsteps echoed against the cobblestones, memory playing like a film reel. He had walked away from Elena on a snowy night just like this. But now, even with snow falling, he didn't feel cold. He pulled out his phone and texted Carolyn. "I understand we're lost to each other, but I need to live honestly with the past and the truth." The reply came quickly. "Too late, James. I needed that truth 20 years ago." At the hospital the next morning, Elena was being prepped for a new round of dialysis. James sat quietly beside her as the nurse set up. "If I had one wish," he said, "it wouldn't be to undo what I did. It would be to go back to that night, to sit beside you, hold your hand, and stay with you all the way through." Elena exhaled softly, but didn't turn. "That night is gone, James. But tomorrow can still be a beginning." And it was. Though grief doesn't heal in an instant, James now walked a different road. Not one of running, but of staying. Because sometimes forgiveness isn't about whether someone deserves it. Sometimes it's about deciding that you deserve peace. Sacrifice, the first responsible choice. Outside the hospital window, Boston lay still in the fading gray of late autumn. In the waiting room, James Whitmore sat rigid, his hand clenched tightly around a paper cup of cold coffee. The door opened, and a man in his 60s walked in wearing a white coat. His expression was serious, but his presence was calm and assured. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, "I'm Dr. Samuel Rhodes from the Johns Hopkins Transplant Center. Elena contacted us some time ago. Her case is critical." James nodded. "I know. I was told I'm not a match. Not eligible to donate." Dr. Rhodes sat down across from him. "By traditional medical standards, yes. But we're conducting a cross-protocol clinical trial that allows certain borderline candidates. It's risky, but for Elena, it might be her last chance." James didn't hesitate. "I'll do it. Sign me up now." 3 days later, James sent an email to Whitmore Capital's board. He announced he was taking a 3-month leave to undergo the donation and recovery process. The same day, Carolyn filed for divorce. Her response to his phone call was short and cold. "Good luck, James. You finally chose something close to being human." At Johns Hopkins, Elena was admitted in visibly declining health. Chloe and Daniel worked remotely, alternating shifts by her side. "Are you scared you might not make it back?" Chloe asked as James signed the final consent forms. "I'm more afraid of watching you lose your mother," James replied. "I can't change the past, but I can be the father I failed to be for the last 25 years. Daniel stayed silent, but as James turned away, he felt a hand on his shoulder for the first time. Just before surgery, Elena asked to speak to James alone. "I know you're scared," she said softly. "You've always feared being seen as the man who failed." James swallowed. "Because I'm a man who failed." Elena shook her head gently. "You're the man trying to save me. And I've lived long enough to know heroes aren't the ones who write checks. They're the ones who show up, scared, and still stay." The transplant began at 6 a.m. The operating room was quiet, sealed in focus. Elena was prepped on one table, James on another. 2 lives, once torn apart, now tethered by flesh, risk, and redemption. The scalpel made its first cut with surgical silence. And in that moment, a man who once ran from responsibility began rewriting his life with blood and bone. James awoke in recovery groggy, weak, and sore. Before he could speak, Chloe was already at his side, holding his hand. "Mom made it through. Her body's accepting the kidney. Dr. Rhodes says the first 48 hours are looking positive." James blinked through tears. "I'm still here. Daniel stepped into the room. You did the one thing no one in this family ever did before. You faced it, and you gave something up. James looked between his children. Do we have a chance at being a family? Daniel hesitated, then nodded. Quietly. But it was real. In the stillness between two recoveries, James was finally allowed to see Elena. She wore an oxygen mask and looked pale, but her eyes brightened the moment she saw him. You survived, huh? She whispered. I did, and I know now. Nothing after this will ever be the same. Elena smiled behind the mask. Sacrifice isn't lost, James. It's what we do when we realize we still have something worth giving. And you still have so much to give. In that moment, James understood. This was the first choice he hadn't run from. The first one made with full weight, full consequence. And from that choice, life was given back to the one he had hurt most. Shattered in the beginning. Sunday morning in Boston. The sky hung low, heavy and gray, matching the mood inside James Whitmore as he faced, for the first time, the full collapse of a life built on silence. The video call came while he was still recovering from surgery in his hospital bed. Carolyn's face appeared on screen, calm but distant. I'm staying at Linda's, she said quietly. James, I know everything. About Elena, about Chloe and Daniel, and that you've known for a while, but chose not to tell me. James closed his eyes. He had known this moment would come. I'm sorry, he said. Carolyn didn't flinch, didn't cry. She simply looked at him with steady eyes. We've been together for 20 years. I trusted you. I built a life on a foundation you never let me see. You're not the man I thought I married. James clenched his jaw. You're right. I wasn't the man you needed. I kept running until Elena showed up at my door, tired and still carrying a pain I helped create. She nodded slowly. I'll sign the divorce papers. I won't ask for your name or your money. I just want my freedom and the truth. And the only thing I ask in return is that you never lie again. Not to anyone. Not even to yourself. 3 days later, James signed enrollment papers for a long-term recovery and monitoring program at Johns Hopkins. He would remain in Baltimore for at least 3 months to heal, both physically and, he hoped, morally. Chloe and Daniel took turns visiting. In their presence, James no longer tried to justify or explain. He no longer deflected. When Daniel said, "You're giving up a lot for someone who once abandoned you," James replied simply, "Because it's the right thing to do." On the 10th day, Elena was moved to a regular room. Though still tired, her color had returned, and the light in her eyes was stronger. James insisted on wheeling himself down the corridor to see her. When she saw him, Elena smiled gently. "You look like royalty in that wheelchair." James gave a weak laugh and lifted a trembling hand to his face. "A king," he said, "but one who's only just learned how to love." They sat in silence. And in Elena's gaze, James saw no pity, no judgment. Only a woman looking at the father of her children. A man who once fractured her life, but whom she chose to forgive. That afternoon, as the sun leaned low across the river, Chloe and Daniel joined James in the hospital garden. James looked at them with raw honesty. "I know I don't deserve the title of father. I left you. I chose ambition over responsibility. I failed you." Daniel looked him in the eye. "But you chose to give a part of yourself to save someone else. You lost everything, and that deserves respect." Chloe reached for his hand. "A father isn't just the man who raises you. Sometimes, he's the one who shows up when you're already grown and chooses to stay." The days before the transplant, slow reconnection. 4 days before the transplant, the entire family was moved to the immunosuppression monitoring wing for pre-surgery care. Each person had their own room along the same corridor, but every evening they gathered in the common lounge of the unit. And those evenings became soft, quiet, and filled with things James had never heard before. "Mom liked naming us based on the seasons," Chloe said with a grin, turning her cup of ginger tea in her hands. "I was born 1 minute before Daniel, so I was Primavera on her first list. It means spring." Daniel chuckled. "And I was Sol, like the sun. But in first grade, kids just call me Salad." Laughter echoed across the small room. Elena tilted her head back, smiling despite the 4 lines still in her arm. "Back then, I just thought, as long as they're alive, as long as they're healthy. James stayed quiet. He didn't interrupt. That, in itself, was something new, learning how to simply listen. Only once did Elena mention him in those memories. When Daniel got pushed at school, she said gently, he cried very softly. But what he said was, maybe it happened because I don't have a dad. Daniel frowned. I don't remember saying that. But you did, Elena replied, her voice tender. And I cried for a week after. James felt something tighten in his chest. Each story was a puzzle piece from the life he had run from, and now it was being laid in front of him. He was finally seeing himself, reflected in the absences they had lived through. On the second day, Chloe brought a drawing to Elena. It showed two children walking under a blazing sun, holding hands. It was a recreation of a picture Daniel had drawn in first grade, but now redrawn by Chloe, more detailed, more vivid, but preserving the original feeling. James stared at it for a long time. In the picture, the children were walking forward. He hadn't been beside them on that path, but perhaps now he could begin walking with them from here forward. The day before the surgery, James was quietly reading over the surgical prep file when Daniel approached. I just want to say, Daniel started, voice careful, I don't know what forgiveness really means. And I'm not ready to call you Dad, but I see you trying. James nodded, deeply moved. He hadn't hoped for promises or absolution. Only this. I won't ever ask you to call me that, James said. I just want to be around, if you'll let me. Daniel gave a quiet nod. That evening, Elena came to sit by James's bed. Are you scared? She asked. I've been scared of many things in my life, he admitted. Scared of being left. Scared of never being good enough. But now, I just want you to live. Elena rested her hand gently on his. Even if I don't make it, I'll live on in your eyes. You're becoming the man I once loved. And more importantly, the father our children always deserved. The morning of the transplant, James sat quietly by the window, watching the first rays of sun cut through the autumn haze. A knock at the door. Chloe, I just wanted to come in early, to say something before it all begins. What is it? James asked. She bit her lip. Thank you. Even if you came late, even if we're still healing. I know you're trying, and I see that. For the first time in 25 years, James Whitmore felt truly seen as a father, and he understood in that moment. This fragile, hard-earned recognition was worth more than any title, any power, any legacy he had ever built. Surgery, a part of the family. The hospital intercom rang out softly, cutting through the quiet stillness of a cold morning. Kidney transplant scheduled for 7 a.m. Patient, Elena Reyes. Donor, James Whitmore. James lay on the operating table, his thoughts flickering in and out like restless waves. In his mind, one image lingered. Elena's face just before the operating room doors closed. She had whispered, "Let's see each other again when everything's better, okay?" In the surgical suite, the team moved with focused precision. Beeping monitors, crisp instructions, steady hands, everything a balance between duty and hope. James was put under full anesthesia, but somewhere deep inside, his heart kept beating, and a small part of his mind held onto a question. What if I don't wake up? Chloe and Daniel sat in the waiting room, quiet, tense. It was the first time in their lives they had seen their biological father go under the knife. The wounds between them hadn't fully healed, but they knew this. James was doing the right thing. Nearly 3 hours later, a young nurse stepped out. The transplant was successful. Both James and Elena are stable. Now we just monitor and let their bodies adjust. Daniel exhaled deeply, his fingers still clasped. Chloe broke into quiet tears, not from fear, but from the soft relief of a hope being reborn. James woke in the dim light of the recovery room. The sterile scent of disinfectant lingered, accompanied by the rhythmic beeping of machines. His head felt heavy. Dad! Daniel's voice was quiet as he stepped forward. I'm here. James turned toward his son, those same hazel eyes looking back at him. Elena, he asked hoarsely. She's okay. The kidney's working. The doctors say it went well. James let out a long breath, like something heavy had finally fallen off his chest. Daniel pulled a chair closer. Thanks for staying this time. Dad, just one sentence. But for James, it was everything a beginning, the start of forgiveness. He let the tears fall freely, not out of guilt, but because for the first time in a very long time, he'd been given something back that he thought was gone forever. A second chance. After the storm, not perfect, but it has begun. James Whitmore began his day not with boardroom calls or finance briefings, but by taking a deep breath, slowly sitting up his hospital bed, placing a hand over his chest, and simply feeling the rhythm of his healing body. He was no longer the James Whitmore who strode out of a penthouse in a pressed Navy suit, who sat behind the gleaming desk at Whitmore Capital. Now, he was a man with silver in his hair and a fresh surgical scar, learning to grip the railing with shaky hands as he carefully placed one foot in front of the other down the quiet hallway. And in every slow, tentative step was the last thing he had left to fight for. To be a father, to be present. On the seventh day, when the hospital quieted and monitors stopped beeping like restless clocks, James was cleared to move to the recovery wing. There, he was given a room near Elena's. Chloe was the first to visit. I brought you some soup. Hospital kind. Not great. James smiled, voice still hoarse. Didn't think I'd see the day you'd worry about me. Chloe didn't smile back, but she said, I'm not sure I'll ever say I forgive you, but at least I don't hate you anymore. James was overwhelmed. For the first time in decades, he placed a hand over his heart and wept, quiet, trembling tears, the kind that dissolve the boundaries of pain. In the family wing, Daniel sat between James and Elena. There were quiet moments of learning each other again, watching a football game together, teasing the nurse just enough to get a smile. James mostly listened. He learned about the art competition Daniel had won at 12, about the time Chloe had played the lead in the school play. Mom was always there, Chloe said softly, every night. And Dad, you were the man we imagined into absence. James nodded slowly. I regret it more than I can say. And I regret it more because you both turned out to be incredible without me. Elena looked at him. Her face was still pale, but her eyes sparkled with life. James, she said gently, we can't go back, but we can choose what to do with now. James nodded again. His eyes shone. Back in Boston, Whitmore Capital was transitioning. Chloe and Daniel began working closely with the board. James took a new role, not as the man in charge, but as an advisor. For the first time in his life, he was learning how to trust the next generation, how to believe in family. Before James left the hospital, Chloe came by and set a book on the table. When I was little, I used to think things would have been different if you'd read this with me. Now I just want you to have it. Get better soon. The book was The Little Prince. James opened the first page, his hands trembling. In the weeks that followed, he lived in a small rented room near the hospital. He wrote in a journal, read, walked when he could. On Fridays, Daniel would pick him up and they'd stroll through a small park. Some days they walked in silence. Some days, Daniel talked about starting his first company. You know, Daniel said once, I used to want to become someone you'd be forced to recognize. Someone worthy of your name. Some days, I just wanted to walk into a room and say, I'm James Whitmore's son. James looked at him. And now, I just want to know who you really are, even if it's 25 years late. That night, in the small kitchen of the guest house, Elena boiled water. James helped her unwrap the tea bags. We never did this when we were younger, James said. Tea at night. I was always too busy, and then too ashamed. Elena placed her hand on his. But tonight, you're here. That matters more than everything else. In that moment of quiet, James finally understood. Family isn't perfection. Family is the people who stay, even when you've failed, even when time has passed, because you return with a heart that still wants to try. He wasn't a perfect father, but now, at last, he was becoming one. And that, to him, was nothing short of a miracle. An invitation and the first dinner. James Whitmore's new house sat on the hillside just west of Boston. Not the grand estate he once shared with Carolyn, but a modest two-story home with a small porch and windows that looked out onto a garden of lavender and rosemary. He hadn't chosen the house for luxury, but for the feeling of starting over, somewhere the echoes of past mistakes couldn't follow him. That day, it rained lightly. James moved clumsily around the kitchen, trying to whisk a vinaigrette from a cookbook. He had never made dinner for others, not like this. Every movement was awkward, but something in the messiness made it feel real. As if for the first time, he was stepping into a life he'd only watched from the outside. At around 5 p.m., he sent the message. Dinner at 6:30. No pressure. No expectations. Just a quiet evening. I hope you'll come. He didn't know if they would. Chloe was the first to reply. A thumbs-up emoji, followed by, Daniel's driving. Mom's coming too. James stared at the message for a long time, as if it were something sacred, proof of forgiveness, or at least the possibility of moving toward it. When the SUV pulled up to the driveway, dinner was ready. Lasagna, Elena's old favorite, salad, and garlic bread. James opened the door, heart pounding. Elena stepped out first, in a wine-colored coat, hair tied back, face tired from surgery, but eyes still bright. Chloe followed, holding a bottle of red wine. Daniel, dressed simply, carried a fresh-cut bouquet of lavender. For Dad's new garden, Daniel said, handing it over. It was the first time he had called James that. James took the bouquet, throat tightening. He didn't try to hide the emotion. He just smiled and nodded. Thank you. Come on in. It's not much, but I hope it feels warm. They entered. The air inside held a gentle awkwardness, like visiting a place once familiar but not yet home. Chloe set the wine on the table. Mom said you used to be great at picking wine. I did, James replied. Back then, I thought it was how you impress people. Now, I just hope everyone feels comfortable. He poured the wine quietly. No toasts, no ceremony. Just a gesture of gratitude. Dinner began hesitantly, but slowly warmed. Elena ate little, but smiled often. Daniel told stories about fixing computers with high school friends. Chloe brought up how their mother used to sneak vegetables into spaghetti, something they never noticed. What about you, Dad? Chloe asked unexpectedly. What did you do all those years? I mean, besides work? James set his fork down. The question was gentle, but it landed heavily. I spent most of that time trying not to think about what I lost. I buried myself in work, in events, in spreadsheets and contracts. I kept telling myself I was fine. But truthfully, there was always an emptiness. Chloe nodded. Her expression softened. Maybe now you don't have to prove anything anymore. Daniel added, not prove, just show up. After dinner, they moved to the porch. Rain still fell softly. The scent of lavender drifted through the open window. James made tea and handed out the cups. Elena wrapped herself in a scarf, sitting between her children. James sat across from them, hands wrapped around warm porcelain. James, Elena said, voice soft as the rain. I know we can't go back. But tonight felt like I stepped into a part of life I thought I'd lost. James was quiet for a moment, then said, I'm not asking to be forgiven right away. But if it's possible, I'd like to do one thing. Invite you all here every week. Just dinner. No past, no expectations. Just now. Elena looked to their children. Daniel shrugged. Chloe nodded first. All right, but next week, I'm picking the menu. James laughed, really laughed for the first time in years. Chloe, you pick. Daniel, you're on dessert. Your mom gets to critique the chefs. And me? I'll do the dishes. Laughter followed. Not loud, not forced, but real. For the first time, they laughed together like a family. As the night wound down, Elena stood, rubbing her arms. We should go. The weather's changing. I still need to rest. James walked them to the car. Daniel helped Elena into her seat. Chloe brushed his shoulder gently, her eyes gleaming beneath the porch light. You're doing better than you think, Dad. The SUV pulled away. James stood under the drizzle for a moment, then turned inside. He switched on the kitchen light and began washing the dishes, not out of duty, but because of something deeper, a feeling of belonging. As he placed the last fork in the rack, he looked around the kitchen. He saw 3 warm tea mugs. The lavender Daniel brought still rested on the table. Elena's scarf was left on the chair. Something had begun, not a perfect ending, but a seedling of family, nurtured by patience, truth, and simple dinners shared together. Once a week. And for James, that was the greatest miracle life had ever given. The most important investment beyond success. The plane touched down at Logan International Airport under a golden afternoon sky. Sunlight streamed through the oval windows, casting long beams across the cabin floor. James Whitmore sat near the window, gazing out at Boston, a city that had once been his kingdom and now a place of quiet redemption. He breathed deeply. For the first time in years, the breath wasn't to steady a restless heart. It was simply to feel alive. Elena sat a few rows away, between Daniel and Chloe. After a successful transplant and weeks of careful recovery in Baltimore, they were returning not only with restored health, but with something more fragile, the quiet hope of becoming a family again. Not the family they once imagined, but one remade in gentleness and truth. Daniel leaned over and whispered something that made Elena laugh. Her eyes sparkled, weary but warm. Chloe, ever focused, was reading a financial report on her tablet, a habit James recognized in himself, now mirrored in his daughter. The plane came to a full stop. A soft chime sounded overhead. Passengers began rustling for their bags. James stayed seated for a moment longer, letting the ambient noise wash over him like the final page of a long chapter. Outside the terminal, the Boston air was brisk, a November wind curling through their coats. James took Elena's small suitcase as Chloe called for a car. Daniel followed behind, earbuds in, but eyes always on his mother. On the drive home, the car passed streets James had traveled thousands of times. But today, everything looked different. He no longer noticed the banks or corporate towers or the bars he used to frequent with partners. Instead, he saw a soccer field full of kids, an old elementary school, a gas station where an elderly man scrubbed windshields with patient care. All the things he used to overlook now appeared in high definition, like a portrait of a life he had once abandoned. 2 days after returning to Boston, James walked into the Whitmore Capital headquarters, not to command but to say goodbye. He convened the board and announced his resignation as CEO, officially transferring leadership to Chloe and Daniel, not merely as part of a business deal, but as an act of trust, an offering of atonement. "This company has been my life's work for over 2 decades, James said, voice steady but thick with emotion. But what I've learned these past few months is this. Some things can't be measured by revenue or market share. And some people, some chances never come again." No one objected. Those who once knew James as an unyielding executive now saw a man transformed and respected him all the more. After the meeting, Chloe handed James a small box. "Mom kept this for a long time," she said softly. "She thought it was time you had it." Inside was a pink plastic hospital bracelet. Faded letters read, "Baby girl, Elena Whitmore, 2:27 a.m., 4.6 pounds. James froze. He had never known this bracelet existed, and now it was in his hands, a relic of what had been lost but never erased. That weekend, their first Friday night dinner became a new tradition. Elena, still recovering, insisted on making Cuban-style chicken and rice. James helped slice vegetables, awkwardly, but with the quiet enthusiasm of someone cooking beside someone he once feared he'd never see again. Daniel opened a bottle of white wine. Chloe set the table. Soft salsa music floated from a Bluetooth speaker. The kitchen felt full, not just with food, but with warmth, with life. When they finally sat down, James lifted his glass. "Our first dinner," he said, "not to make up for the past, but to plant something better for the future." No one added a word, but every glance across the table carried agreement. After dinner, as the others cleared plates, James stood beside Elena at the sink. "I still don't understand," he said quietly, "how you found it in your heart to forgive me." Elena dried her hands, leaning on the counter. "James, forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about freeing yourself from carrying the weight of anger. If I hadn't let go, our children and I wouldn't have been able to live." James nodded, voice low. "So, is there still any chance for us?" She offered a faint smile. "We're not who we were, but maybe there's a different version of us. One that doesn't need a label, just honesty." James gently took her hand. "I'd like to try, if you'll let me." She didn't pull away. "You already started, James. The day you came back. By month's end, James underwent a checkup. His kidney function had stabilized. The numbers looked good. No signs of further decline. He left the hospital with a clean report and a heart lighter than he'd known in years. On the way home, he stopped at a small framing shop. Later that evening, he printed a photo Daniel had taken the week before. The four of them, laughing on the front porch. He placed the framed photo on his bookshelf, beneath the old clock his mother once kept in her kitchen. He glanced around the house. It wasn't big. It wasn't lavish. But in every detail, the basil plant by the sink, Elena's unfinished knitting on the couch, the lamp Daniel rewired, the investment book Chloe left behind, was the quiet truth of something priceless. Home. That Sunday, James sat on the porch and wrote a letter, a new habit. James, you walked through a life of power and applause. But you had to lose everything to realize the greatest success doesn't show up on spreadsheets. It's in the way your son calls you dad, in the sound of your daughter laughing about her childhood, in the gaze of the woman you left behind, who still found the grace to forgive. Once, you ran from two brown-skinned babies because of fear, pride, and ignorance. Now, you choose to stay. And no investment in your lifetime will ever bring you more return than this one. James. That afternoon, on the porch, James and Elena drank tea while Chloe and Daniel planted lavender in the yard. Do you think we were too late? Elena asked. James shook his head gently. Too late for the past, but just in time for the present. They looked toward their children, laughing under the soft light, like scattered pieces coming together into something imperfect but whole. And James knew, for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he belonged. Not a CEO, not a man on the run, but a father learning to love, a man learning how to truly live. And that was the greatest investment of all. Between towers and deadlines, what truly matters? We live in an era where success is measured in bank accounts, job titles printed on business cards, and follower counts on social media. Many of us, like James Whitmore in the story, spend a lifetime climbing toward what society praises as the pinnacle, only to discover that once we get there, we're alone. James is not some distant fictional figure. He's a reflection of millions of American adults, those who once made a wrong choice out of fear, prejudice, or a lack of courage to stay. He represents a generation of men raised on rigid expectations, to be successful, to be strong, but never taught how to apologize, how to take responsibility, or how to heal the wounds they've caused. James's story begins with abandonment, a decision that seemed wise at the time. But that choice cost him something irreplaceable, the chance to be a father, to walk beside his children as they grew up, and the love of a woman who once trusted him completely. Many of us have also run from hard conversations, from responsibility, from the people who needed us most, all to protect an illusion of strength. But life, in its quiet grace, often offers us a second chance. For James, that chance came late, 25 years late. But it arrived as life's gentle whisper. It's not too late if you're willing to face it. And what makes his journey moving is not a dramatic twist about bloodlines, but the raw, hesitant, and honest path of a man learning to grow up, finally. Elena, the woman he left behind, is not portrayed as a victim. She embodies strength and forgiveness. She doesn't seek revenge, doesn't let pain harden her children's hearts. She raises them with love and truth, even when the truth hurts. And when James returns, she has the strength to look at him not as the man who left, but as the father her children might still need. In a country like the United States, where over 40% of children grow up in non-traditional families, where divorce, separation, and emotional distance are part of daily reality, James and Elena's story is not rare. What makes it powerful is its message. Forgiveness is not forgetting, but choosing not to let pain lead the way. Perhaps the most unforgettable moment is when James writes the letter to himself, when he realizes, after decades of contracts and capital gains, that true success isn't in profit margins. It's in his son's hand resting in his daughter's laughter recalling childhood memories, in a family dinner where no one has to perform. We don't have to wait 25 years to learn that. Look around. Is there someone in your life waiting for an apology? A check-in? A simple, sincere gesture? Is there someone you left behind because you thought career, pride, or ego mattered more? And most of all, do you still have time to go back and make it right, even just a little? None of us are perfect. We make mistakes. We hurt people. Then we justify moving on without looking back. But James Whitmore's story gives us a mirror, not to judge ourselves harshly, but to ask, am I becoming the person I want to be? If the answer is not yet, that's okay. As long as you're here, as long as you have time and the heart to say something honest, to do something kind, it's not too late. Because in the end, as James came to understand, the most important things in life aren't measured in titles or accolades, but in how you love and are loved when the spotlight fades. Choose to stay. Thank you so much for being here. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to bring you more heartfelt stories soon. Until next time, stay kind, stay inspired, and I'll see you in the next one.